I call to order the 1457th plenary meeting of the Conference on Disarmament. Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Since our last plenary meeting, we have received a request from one delegation wishing to participate in our work as a non-member state. As in document CD/WP.604/add6 before you, based on the requests received after 3 p.m. on Friday, the 18th of May 2018. Are there any comments on this request? May I take it that the conference decides to invite this state to participate in our work in accordance with the rules of procedure? It is so decided. Allow me to briefly suspend the meeting in order to allow the representative of the non-member state who had just been invited to participate in the work of the conference to take the seat in the council chamber. The meeting is suspended. The meeting is resumed. Excellencies, dear colleagues, allow me now to turn to the list of speakers for today. Does any delegation wish to take the floor? This does not seem... The Syrian Arab Republic. Please, Ambassador, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would like to convey thanks for your guidance of the conference. Following the Swiss presidency, we adopted the decision that launched the subsidiary bodies under Resolution 2119, and I hope that the Syrian presidency will be able to contribute in order to bring success to the concerted efforts of the 6 presidencies this year. This has been a fruitful period despite the complications and the differing approaches. Madam President, during the meeting held by the Conference on Disarmament last week, 2 members of the conference made statements on the tripartite issue affecting the Syrian Arab Republic, which the targeting of Damascus and other cities, and I would like to review certain elements of the statements and provide some clarifications. The tripartite aggression confirms that the states that carried out the attack do not take into account international law and believe in unilateral force, although they are permanent members of the Security Council with a responsibility to uphold peace and security internationally. And they are therefore required to prevent attacks under the principles of the Charter. This flagrant aggression against a sovereign country is a threat to international peace and security. It leads to a spiraling of tension in the region and the concerns in the world regarding the use of force in international relations. It undermines international law and the United Nations Charter, which these nations are required to uphold. It is a disappointment to see that the British ambassador and the French delegate used this forum to justify aggression as a response to the statement regarding the use of chemical weapons in Douma. They are responsible for upholding non-proliferation. We were therefore not surprised by the aggression, given the content of the statements that preceded, launched by the perpetrators of the attacks. As mentioned several times, there was the pretext of the use of chemical weapons in Duma was used as a justification for the use of these weapons against Syria, as in Conf. This incident was used as a pretext for aggression on Syrian territory. These allegations and these lies, and I repeat every time, the Syrian armed forces are fighting terrorist groups and liberating land from terrorists. Last week we heard statements that were far from any evidence. There were videos fabricated by the white helmets regarding Duma, and there were witness statements on 26th April provided at the headquarters of the OPCW in The Hague, but they were not taken into account. These witness accounts by several persons who denied those allegations, according to which chemical weapons and toxin weapons had been used in Duma. The aggressor states made accusations against Syria regarding responsibility for the Duma attack, while the White Helmets organization published fallacious reports regarding that incident. Before the arrival of the Commission of Inquiry, under that organization, which was intended to verify the veracity of the attacks on Duma, that attack was launched, which shows that those states are complicit. They orchestrated the incident and participated in carrying out those attacks in order to justify aggression against Syria. Contrary to the attempt by those states to pretend that the accusations against the Syrian authorities of being responsible for those attacks is something demonstrable, any logical analysis shows that this accusation of use of chemical weapons is nonsensical. The Battle of Duma was already ended. There had been steps taken in order to evacuate the terrorists and their families from Duma. This shows that the states I have mentioned do not wish to carry out professional objective inquiries regarding the use of chemical weapons or end the provocations of the terrorist groups and NGOs, such as the White Helmets organization. These states have claimed that the military action against Syria, which is anything but an aggression, I'm speaking of the Syrian action, these states claim that these actions were violations of international law and Security Council resolutions, namely the actions by Syria. And these states would not admit that the unilateral aggression, which was not mandated by the Security Council, while the states that it was not mandated by the Security Council, while they claim to speak for the Security Council. Now, the description of the military aggression, according to international law, looking at the use of force against a sovereign state under the United Nations Charter, that was a violation of international law. I would recall to those countries, I would remind those countries that there was a statement by the Secretary General to the Security Council on 14th of April this year, and I quote, I call on all states and members to behave in a manner that is in harmony with the United Nations Charter and international law, including the rules regarding combating chemical weapons. If one ignores the law, then that will be a violation of the law. End of quote. The Syrian Arab Republic has reaffirmed several times that it condemns the use of chemical weapons of any kind, in any place, at any time, in all circumstances. We have stated that we do not possess any chemical weapons, so the attempts to justify military aggression against Syrian territory based on supposedly, and I quote, wishing to reduce Syrian chemical weapon capacities and prevent use of those weapons in the future, end of quote, as claimed by the aggressor states, is nothing more than unfounded allegations. States that make such accusations are states that know perfectly well that Syria does not have a chemical weapons arsenal. It gave up its chemical program in 2013. It is the very same states that contributed to destroying the chemical weapons transferred out of Syria in order to eliminate these under the supervision of the OPCW. Those states know very well that the facilities for production were destroyed under the supervision of the OPCW and under its supervision, claiming that Syria has not adhered to its obligations in terms of destruction of the chemical arsenal are simply refuted by the statement made by the joint UN-OPCW Commission to the Security Council on 23 June 2014. As regards the allegations to the effect that the facilities targeted by the tripartite aggression were part of the chemical weapons program, I refute that lie, emphasizing that one of the positions targeted by the aggression and destroyed on the pretext that it was a chemical weapons facility was in fact a scientific and teaching facility under the Damascus Scientific Research Center. And that facility had been inspected already by the OPCW twice last year. The OPCW in its report had confirmed that there was no activity that contravened the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. These states targeted the center that I have just mentioned, which was destroyed by the aggression, on this pretext of falsified information. The pretext of chemical weapons was used in order to impose a periodic inspection under a decision taken by the executive body of the OPCW. Now, last year, the OPCW carried out 2 inspection cycles. The reports were made available and stated that there was no activity that contravened the convention. So the reports from the OPCW show that these allegations are false. And these are not facilities conducting illicit activities under the terms of the Convention on the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. In conclusion, Madam President, achieving the objectives of the Convention on Chemical Weapons, which seeks to establish a universal effective regime against chemical weapons, can be done only through, it cannot be done through attempts to exploit the convention and instrumentalize it for false objectives in order to establish new mechanisms to serve the limited interests of a handful of states. Preserving the non-proliferation regime, as internationally agreed, cannot be done through parallel frameworks or by legitimizing international frameworks outside the United Nations, or trying to implement mandates of specific international bodies, such as the OPCW through the Paris Meeting for International Partnership. Seeking to promote political considerations in that conference is to refuse to take into account the dangers that arise from the position of certain terrorists. Certain members are exhibiting selectivity and double standards in their approach to the international system to combat chemical weapons without taking into account the real dangers threatening the world. Socrates once said that when there is a lack of debate, defamation is what comes to the fore. Thus, it is important to uphold true dialogue in order to pursue the objectives of the Conference on Disarmament and its mandate. We must stop attempts to use the conference to manipulate the facts in order to hide the failures of some. Thank you.
Thank the Ambassador of the Syrian Arab Republic, and now give the floor to the representative of the United States. Ambassador Wood, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm taking the floor to respond to some of the remarks made by the representative of the Assad regime here. First of all, I'm not going to go into much detail at all about Syria's use of chemical weapons. We did that last week. I don't need to repeat that for everyone here, but I do want to make a few points. First of all, the regime's use of chemical weapons against its own people is not in dispute. We have tried repeatedly using economic and diplomatic tools to try to end these horrific attacks against the Syrian people. Syria's attacks, the regime's attacks against its own people, are basically a threat to international peace and security. No matter what the regime's representatives say here in this forum or in other fora, we all know the truth. Because of the repeated use of these horrific weapons by this regime, Syria has neither the legitimacy nor moral authority to serve as president of this august body. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ambassador Wood, and now give the floor to France. Monsieur Riquet, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, President. I am taking the floor as part of a right of reply, just in case other delegations wish to take the floor and make general comments. I'm quite happy to take the floor at a later stage of the proceedings.
Delegation wishing to take the floor, so please go ahead. with your right of reply.
Je vous remercie.
My thanks, President. As I've already said, Madam President, I am taking the floor as part of a right of reply in response to the comments made by the delegate from Syria. It goes without saying that I firmly refute all of the comments and statements that have just been delivered. And in order to verify the facts, I would urge delegations here to refer to the statement I made last week on the joint action undertaken by France, the United Kingdom and the United States of America subsequent to the criminal use of chemical weapons in Douma on the 7th of April 2018. I find it an act of particular cynicism that this platform, a quasi-presidential platform, be used, given that Syria is speaking from the presidential platform, that this presidential platform be used to make statements of this nature, and particularly to accuse my own country of various facts, including the fact that France is making a contribution to weakening international law, and that its actions as a state threaten global peace and stability and security. France is not a threat to peace and security. France contributes to strengthening peace and international security wherever it can by shouldering and facing up to its responsibilities. France is not undermining international law. Rather, it contributes to strengthening it wherever possible in all possible fora, and particularly by ensuring that international law is respected and that where it is violated, the perpetrators of such violations are prosecuted. And this is part of the undertaking in that France launched in January 2018, and a new session was held on Friday in Paris to combat impunity when chemical weapons are used. And we have been told that an information session will be held here at 2 p.m. on Friday, here in Geneva, so that delegations can be informed of recent developments in this partnership I've just mentioned. The statements of the delegate of Syria are all the more cynical because, as the ambassador of the United States has just said, Syria does not have the moral authority or the political legitimacy to give anyone any lessons in good global conduct. Since the outset of the Syrian conflict, we are mourning more than 400,000 deaths, millions of people displaced or have become refugees, and this adds to the countless moral suffering that has been inflicted during this conflict. Given this, Syria is not well placed to give any lessons in global conduct. As to repeated violations of non-proliferation standards, the use of chemical weapons, as has been attested by numerous sources and competent authorities, then once again, Syria is not well placed to give any lessons in global conduct. I will conclude my right of reply here, and thank you, Madam President.
For France, I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and good morning, colleagues. I too would like to take the floor to refute the comments made just now by the Syrian delegation. Last week, my ambassador set out very clearly on behalf of the US, France, and the United Kingdom the logic and rationale for the strikes in Syria, including setting out the legal case for those strikes, which we believe was robust. Madam President, it is not the UK, France, or the US that is in breach of international law. It is the Syrian regime themselves, a regime that has used chemical weapons on its own people and been proven to do that 4 times. Therefore, as my American and French colleagues have just said, they do not have the moral authority or political authority to be making such statements from the presidential podium. To repeat, Madam President, I refute entirely the statement just made by the Syrian regime. Thank you.
Does any other delegation wish to take the floor on this issue and exercise the right of reply? This doesn't... Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic. Ambassador, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أنا بداية أود التوضيح.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Let me at the outset clarify one point. It is not my intent to make use of the presidential podium to launch any political campaign. I have simply engaged in an exercise which is the sovereign right of my country in order to respond to the groundless allegations against my country, which have been launched repeatedly against my country in this room in respect of the military attack against Syria. To allow such lies to continue to be spread simply prepares the ground for further attacks. Attacks which have been launched in breach of international lawfulness. I reiterate that Syria is aware of its responsibilities and its commitments as we approach our presidency of this body that we're a member of. We do not make use of this platform to serve a political agenda. We expect other member states of this conference to equally respect the mandate of this forum and to abide by its agenda, and to abstain from introducing politicized issues into the discussions that take place in this body. Our colleague from the United States believes that what he calls the Syrian regime's use of chemical weapons is incontrovertible, but this is not true. And it is shown by the Hague Conference deliberations and the Security Council deliberations. I would address the following questions. Who has given these countries a mandate to act so unilaterally, indeed without a Security Council mandate? Who has allowed them to implement their decisions in this way? This is not part of a diplomatic campaign, as the Ambassador of the United States has said. What we are witnessing is an aggression under international law in flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter. These are states that are waiving their responsibilities as Security Council members, and they themselves are not well placed to give lessons in legitimacy, lawfulness, and responsibility, accountability. When it comes to respecting the truth, then there must be an objective inquiry conducted with integrity. And to countries that are concerned about the use of chemical weapons, I address the following questions. Why have these states launched a military attack against Syria at the very moment when the members of the team to establish events from the OPCW was in fact on its way to Damascus to try and establish the facts. Why did they simply not wait the outcome of this inquiry? Why do these countries time and again launch military attacks prior to the outcome of investigations being known? This happened in Duma and last year elsewhere too. My country is committed to abiding by all its contractual obligations under the Convention. We are willing to cooperate with the OPCW in order to establish and refute all allegations, but we must let the organisation do its work without any political interference. Thank you, ma'am.
I thank the Ambassador of the Syrian Arab Republic and ask if any other delegation would like to exercise the right of reply. I see the Russian Federation. Sir, you have the floor.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель.
Thank you, Madam President. I cannot say that we want to use the right of reply, but as we see it, the comments on this matter under discussion, it would be appropriate to make some comments because the issues here pertaining to a very delicate situation, namely non-proliferation of chemical weapons and their use, deserve attention. We are not going to try to justify or accuse anybody. In our comments, we want to point to the events and the facts. Khan Shehun, let us recall. That was an incident with the use of chemical weapons on 4th April last year. Now, in response, on 7th of April, there were rocket attacks by the USA on the Syria aviation base, where it was claimed that the plane that dropped the chemical bombs had flown out of. In that connection, we should recall that the preliminary conclusion of the OPCW on that incident was only made on the 20th of April, 2 weeks after the attack. At the same time, there was only the type of toxin, SYRIAN, or an analogous substance had been identified at the time. And there was a further investigation, but it wasn't a full one. The final conclusions were provided only on 26th October. Now, the OPCW, despite the security guarantee of the Syrian government, for a long time refused to go to the Syria air base where that plane, the 122, had supposedly flown from. And when the inspectors finally got there, the samples for analysis were not taken. They didn't take samples. That's a fact. Now, how is it possible then to speak about a comprehensive, objective inquiry? Looking at Duma, there were chemical weapons used in Duma on 7th April. Now, right away, the US, British and French representatives blamed the Syrian government. And on 14th April, there were certain facilities in Syria attacked which were claimed to have links with chemical weapons. The attacks were carried out a day before the planned arrival in Syria of the OPCW inspection team. On 16th of April, the OPCW started its work in Duma. These are facts. They can't be challenged. And these facts belong to a certain logic in terms of the actions of those who are enjoying impunity. First of all, there's an announcement regarding the chemical incident, and in both of the cases, the white helmets are the source of the news. There's no need to explain what kind of a structure that is and whose logic they follow. And then the Syrian government is blamed, and there are rocket attacks to punish them. Again, we're not inventing anything here. Nobody waits for the OPCW's conclusion. That's another fact which history has borne out. The conclusions of the OPCW are then made to follow the logic above. That was the case in Khan Sheikhoun and in Duma. Looking at Khan Sheikhoun, the Russian specialists, on the basis of calculations and formulae, demonstrated that the version did not support the use of chemical bombs dropped from a plane. But everything that follows the laws of physics, ballistics, and aerodynamics was essentially ignored. We would like to point to the fact that in the case of Duma, before the event, the day before, on the 6th of April, there were warnings that members of terrorist groups were preparing, in the regions under their control, attacks using chemical weapons. And just before that, and our President Putin mentioned this, the Syrian government and our colleagues know more about this than anybody else, because the members of the Security Council, there were several contacts made from the OPCW regarding a transfer of chemical components or toxic components for subsequent use as chemical weapons. Now, I'm mentioning this because each time we see exactly the same pattern, it's not just a one-off. Looking at another case, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. That was in March, right? On the 4th of March. On 12th of March, we heard from Theresa May that the source was the Novichok nerve agent or something similar. Now, at the same time, the Russian ambassador Yevgeny was given an ultimatum. Russia had to provide full information about the Novichok program. On 14th March, Theresa May accused Russia of trying to kill Skripal and his daughter and sent out 23 Russian diplomats from the country. They were expelled. On the same day, 14th of May, in the Security Council, Britain accused Russia of violating the Convention Against Chemical Weapons without any evidence or facts. And then there were a lot of claims of the same kind by the EU and other organizations. Now, what about the OPCW? what was being done in connection with the OPCW, that authority to which our colleagues refer. The OPCW mechanisms were not used. The organization was only brought in to confirm the conclusions drawn in the Porton Down laboratory. The OPCW report on the Salisbury incident only came out on 12th April after the Russian diplomats had left London and many other Western capitals. Moreover, in the OPCW report, in the public version and the private version, there was only one conclusion: the type of substance. And the possible origin of the substance wasn't shown. That did not lie within the responsibility of the OPCW. Distinguished colleagues, once more, we want to point to the fact that these are facts. Nobody ever, by the use of force, is going to get any weight for the conclusions of the OPCW. Several times we have sought objective, professional, unbiased analyses from that organization. That's the only thing we have called for in the OPCW and the Security Council. Likewise, I would mention this. No actions or suspicions of actions justify unlawful response. It's not possible duly to follow the international legal system if you violate it yourself. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation and now give the floor to the representative of the United States. Ambassador Wood, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I need to respond to comments made by our colleague from the Russian Federation. These Russian accusations against so-called white helmets is frankly shameful. I would also point out that Russia has stood in the way of every single effort the U.S. and its partners have taken over the past year to try to deal with the question of accountability in Syria. By covering for its ally in Damascus, Russia has failed to live up to its international commitments in guaranteeing the removal of chemical weapons from Syria. It's betrayed this Chemical Weapons Convention, UN Security Council Resolution 2118, and its commitments to the OPCW. Finally, I call on Russia to end its blind support for the regime in Damascus, and for Russia to call on that regime to stand down from assuming the CD presidency. Syria's presidency will undermine this body and demean this institution, and this is something that should not happen. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ambassador Wood and give now the floor to France. Monsieur, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you very much, Madam President. I don't want to draw out this discussion, which it's not appropriate to have. I just want to return for a moment to the statements made by the delegate of the Russian Federation, whose intention is clear indeed. It is to sow the seeds of doubt, to distort attention, and indeed to distort reality. When it comes to the facts, well, we must indeed abide by the facts. I don't want to go into the detail of the different points that have been made, but I just wish to remind everyone that missions to establish facts and events have been carried out, that time when the GIM was not the joint investigation mechanism of the Security Council, and a time when this mechanism was not deliberately blocked by Russia. I believe all of this has been very clearly established. With respect to France, for the Khan Sheikhoun attack last year and the e-scooter attack on the 6th of April, we published national evaluations which leave no doubt at all. So let us try and base ourselves on so-called facts rather than distortion of events or counter-truth. This does not constitute evidence. With respect to the comments made by the delegate from Syria, who said that he did not wish to use this political platform as a tool, I believe that he should do what he says that he believes in this instance, and not use the platform as a tool, rather than putting forward statements that try and reverse the burden of proof, that try and accuse France, the United Kingdom, and the United States of violating international law in order to shrug off his country's own responsibilities in an attempt to make us forget that the country that threatens peace and security, the country that violates Security Council resolutions, that violates the non-proliferation regime, is indeed Syria. Thank you.
Representative of France, and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I find it a little strange that certain delegations here say that we should not be raising the issue of chemical weapons in this forum, and yet this morning those delegations themselves have raised these issues. I had no intention this morning of talking about the incident in Salisbury, but our Russian colleague has raised this in this forum again. We've said much on this issue. He talks about facts, but thus far we have not received any plausible explanation as to why a Russian military-grade nerve agent was used in this attack, a nerve agent that could only have been made in Russia, leading us to conclude that there is no other plausible explanation that the Russian Federation was behind this attack. No one will be fooled, Madam President, by the distinguished colleague from Russia's attempts to continually muddy the waters on this issue. And we have been very clear about the way that we have handled this case, and said so on many occasions in this forum. So again, I refute what he has said and ask him to come to us with the facts. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom, and now give the floor to the ambassador of the Syrian Arab Republic. Ambassador, you have the floor.
السيد الرئيس أعتذر
Madam President, I apologize for taking the floor once more in order to respond to certain issues raised by the ambassador of the USA and the delegate of France on my country. Firstly, the attempts to try to manipulate the issue of the presidency of the Conference on Disarmament is something that we refute. That would be to open Pandora's box. What I can say to the US ambassador is this. As it is stated that he who has committed no sin should throw the first stone, and we remind you of that axiom for the future. The conference will be politicized not by any Syrian presidency, but by mechanisms that have been adopted elsewhere over many years, which undermine the conference and its role. It is not a Syrian presidency that could harm this conference, but those who take the floor to justify aggression against a sovereign state in violation of international law. As regards Libya, there was the issue of chemical weapons. Again, that presence was not proved. The perpetrators were not found. It is only intelligence services of the interested countries that find such produce such information. These are not honest inquiries. They're not objective. There was also mention of the British report on the Duma attacks. Some felt that that was a sufficient legal basis to undermine the Syrian authorities, which reminds me of similar reports from intelligence services mentioned by France last year in connection with the Khan Sheikhoun attack. France produced to the conference a report from the intelligence services which stated that a team from the French service had gone to Khan Sheikhoun and carried out an inquiry on the attack in question. The UN Commission at the same time had refused to go there because the region was under the al-Nusra Front, which is part of Al-Qaeda. So the issue is this. How did the intelligence service get access to a region dominated by a terrorist faction? I don't want to speak at length, but those who claim that their accusations had some foundation in terms of irrefutable proof should know that these are allegations that do not stand up in the face of mere common sense. What interest could Syria have in using those weapons? Syria doesn't even possess them. So it's no use producing NGO or intelligence service reports. They are financed by the same services to propagate this type of allegation against the truth. Thank you.
I thank the ambassador of the Syrian Arab Republic. Does any delegation wish to take the floor on this issue or to exercise the right of reply? I see the Russian Federation, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. As I said in my previous comment, we're not accusing anyone or justifying anyone, but just listing the facts. And there's another fact, and it was mentioned last week by myself, but colleagues seem to have forgotten, namely, the American and French experts had the possibility to visit the site of the chemical incident in Duma, and they didn't take it up. Instead, they preferred to use rocket diplomacy. That's the first thing. And the second, as regards the white helmets, as I recall, the US government refused further financing of that NGO. Now, as I see it, it had very good reasons for that. Now, I really am not a supporter of discussions in the conference on disarmament of issues that do not directly fall under the remit of the conference, and we have never taken the initiative to raise such issues here. As regards the Salisbury incident, it's not us, but it's the Western media that began to publish claims that were contrary to the official position of the British government. They began to produce this information, and the publications state the following. There are the information about on the program, the so-called Novichok program, were held. The information was held by a number of Western capitals, and there were official statements made about that recently, including by the President of the Czech Republic. So, I won't refer to any other publications, but in addition, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm not the leading expert as regards chemical weapons, the USA has the Edwards Laboratory or something similar, which regularly publishes information on toxins, toxic substances. Even 20 years ago, in 1998, there was a publication of certain chemical formulae from the family of the Novichok substance. And in subsequent publications, that information is not contained. And there are many other facts I could mention which were mentioned in official statements by Russian representatives. So I will not repeat those now. All of these things I mentioned so that the participants of the Conference on Disarmament may have the full picture regarding what is happening and not rely only on the opinions of certain delegations as if that were the final truth. Now, as regards partnership in combating impunity and the use of chemical weapons, active members and initiators showed what actions they are going to be combating and what essentially they are supporting. And nobody should be in any doubt that all methods will be used in this fight, including strikes against sovereign states and violation of the UN Charter and other fundamental standards in international law. Thank you.
The representative of the Russian Federation, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the United States. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I promised to be brief, and I apologize for taking the floor once again. I just want to make clear once again to my Russian colleague, because he clearly hasn't heard or hasn't been paying attention, gross violations by countries party to the CWC are relevant to this body. I remind my Russian colleague that the CWC was negotiated by the Conference on Disarmament. So I call on my Russian colleague to end this demand because I simply will not comply. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the Ambassador of the United States and now give the floor to the representative of France.
Oui, très brièvement.
Thank you. To be very brief, Madam President, I'm not sure that my understanding was correct, but from what I understood from Syria was that there were certain mentions of the French intelligence services and a so-called collusion between terrorist organizations and France. And I hope that I was mistaken. I hope I misunderstood those words. But if that were the case, of course, I absolutely reject any such a suggestion. I want to be totally clear on that. France does not support in any way terrorism. France combats terrorism unremittingly and with absolute determination. Thank you.
Representative of France, I do not see any further requests for the floor on these issues. No requests to exercise rights of reply. No. Does any delegation wish to take the floor on any other issue? That does not seem to be the case either. Well, colleagues, the Swiss presidency of the CD will come to a close at the end of this week. Today's plenary is therefore the last meeting held under my chairmanship. I am pleased that the constructive spirit that characterized the first part of the CD 2018 session continued overall to prevail under my presidency, and that we have been able to operationalize the principled decision adopted earlier this year to establish subsidiary bodies on all issues of interest to the conference. As I already underlined last week, the establishment of the subsidiary bodies is only an initial step. This decision has drawn the attention of the wider disarmament community and raised expectations. As such, the step that we have taken will not enable the CD to overcome instantly or rapidly its long-standing stalemate. But the mandate that we have adopted to identify commonalities, take forward technical discussions, and consider measures not limited to legally binding instruments constitutes a pragmatic way forward. It provides the possibility for the CD to take steps forward, even if of a limited nature. It opens also the possibility for the CD to explore potential new avenues in order to revitalize its work. Accordingly, subsidiary bodies should be an important, if not the key, focus of our collective attention going forward and until they conclude their work in August. I welcome that they have started holding meetings and that exchanges seem to be both substantial and interactive. For these bodies to succeed and bring clear added value to our efforts, it will be important that they are able to come to some conclusions. This remains an important challenge that we will have to meet collectively. Drawing up a program of work remains the permanent task of any CD presidency. In the current fluid situation, it is my assessment that conditions have not changed and are not met for a program of work to be adopted by the conference at this stage. I have also come to the conclusion that presenting a program of work that would not be met by consensus would not contribute to taking the CD forward. It is my hope, though, that the subsidiary bodies will contribute to facilitating the adoption of a program of work. Before concluding, I would like to express my gratitude to all CD members for their constant engagement. My thanks go also to all of the P6 for their useful guidance and support. Finally, it would be remiss of me not to also extend my thanks to UNODA and the UN Conference Services for all the essential assistance in support of our work. This concludes our business for today. I would like to remind you that Subsidiary Body 4, coordinated by His Excellency Mr. Michael Biontino, Permanent Representative of Germany, will meet this afternoon, 22nd of May at 3 p.m. and on Thursday, 24th of May at 10 a.m. in the morning. Subsidiary Body 3, coordinated by His Excellency Mr. Guilherme de Aguiar Patriota, Permanent Representative of Brazil, will meet tomorrow, Wednesday, 23rd of May at 3 p.m. and on Friday, 25th, of course, of May at 10 a.m. The subsidiary bodies will meet here in the Council chamber. The next plenary meeting of the conference will be held on 28th of May, next Tuesday at 10 a.m. under the presidency of the Syrian Arab Republic in the Council chamber. The meeting is adjourned.